entertainmentbuddha.com.
Everyone, welcome back to, I don't know, Nick, maybe we should just call this the first episode. It'll never be number one, but we're here we've kind of rebranded since the last time we were on the air. And if you've been following along, you know it's myself, Matt, aka the Entertainment Buddha, and my co-pilot, Nick, Red 5 down there in Texas. We've been running a very Star Wars-focused podcast for what, Nick, at least a year and a half now. I think we started after The Force Awakens came out.
Yeah, I mean, officially, we did a couple of casts with some of the other EB crew prior to Force Awakens, but I think we really kicked off our own series probably a month or two after TFA came out.
So it's something we've been doing for a while, just kind of under the umbrella of the EB Podcasting Network, which used to be the ultimate podcast for geek, video game, TV, and blah, blah, super long title news. So we've decided, you know what, considering Nick and I are really the only ones that ever get on the network and throw on our headphones and flip on the mics, we might as well try to rebrand the network name while also establishing a name for our show on the network. So moving forward, just in case you saw something change in your iTunes subscriptions or Google Play or whatever, the podcast network is now known as the best podcast for Star Wars fans and pop culture geeks. So a little more short and to the point, plus the focus on our Star Wars-centric podcast, which is the main podcast show on the network. And let's face it, it is the best podcast for Star Wars fan. Yes, we're narcissistic assholes, but that's what you got to do sometimes to set yourselves apart. So that's the name of the network. The name of these shows you'll be listening to from here on out will be called Star Wars Time with Matt and Nick. So pretty simple, but you get the idea. We've also launched a brand new video series for our YouTube channel, youtube.com/entertainmentbuddha, that Nick came up with. It's brilliant. It's called Less Than 12 Parsecs, and yes, we know other people have used that. So I think there's a podcast called Less Than 12 Parsecs, but that's not a podcast. Its charge is to hopefully 1 or 2 times a week. It really depends. I mean, Nick and I, we volunteer our time for this stuff. We do have real lives to attend to. But when we can, we're going to cook it. We're going to think about a general Star Wars lore question. For example, what the hell is a parsec? Or what is Star Wars Day? When did it start? Those were our first 2 episodes that debuted last week on YouTube. So just make sure to follow us on YouTube, subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Android. We got them all for the podcast. But if you like our Less Than 12 Parsec series, you can get that on YouTube. So, and I'm sure we'll mention it here on the cast. What I'm trying to say, people, is we're really trying to brand ourselves and kind of narrow the focus of the podcast network and some of our videos on the site to Star Wars, because, let's face it, we love it, we know a shit ton about it, and we like getting together and talking about it. So there's my spiel on where things are going. So yes, you are listening to the first official episode of the Star Wars Time Show with Matt and Nick, and you can catch the first 2 episodes of Less Than 12 Parsecs on YouTube. Did I get it all, buddy? All right.
Yeah, it's all good. And if I can throw a suggestion out there, if you guys listening have a question that you've been wondering about Star Wars, maybe just drop it in the comments on YouTube, tweet it at Entertainment Buddha on Twitter, and maybe we'll make a video on that, or Less Than 12 Parsecs on a question that you have.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic, because I know between the 2 of us, we can pull questions out of our ass left and right, but we want to talk about stuff you guys want to hear us talk about. I mean, I know there's some of you out there. We've started getting numbers back from networks where our podcast is hosted. I mean, for some reason, iTunes gives us nothing besides popularity bars, and some are full, some are empty. I don't know what the fuck that means. But we are, I'd say, very humble here. I mean, we're not talking to large audiences, and we understand that. That's why we're kind of changing focus here to hopefully get a larger audience in Star Wars land. But I think conservatively, between all the networks, we're probably talking to, 1,000 to 1,200 people a month. Nick, what do you think? Sound right?
Yeah, that sounds about right, and we hope to grow that. To all the 1,200 or so of you that are listening, thank you very much for sticking with us through the early stages when it was just the Star Wars-centric podcast for the Entertainment Buddha Network, and welcome to the new rebranded stuff. So, we're excited to keep kicking out Star Wars content. Hopefully we get some new people on the ship with us, and we can.
Yeah, speaking of new people, I got to get my buddy Kung Fu Treachery to maybe at least write down his theory or come on the show. But I don't know if you've read the Thrawn book, Nick. Have you?
Not yet.
Yeah, me neither. I mean, I can't read books, but he listened to it and he's been gushing about how well written the character of Thrawn is and all the deep insights you get into him. And he has a theory now that someone that works for Thrawn or someone that Thrawn worked closely with could be Benicio del Toro's character.
Very cool.
And
yeah.
He had plenty of evidence for why he believed this. So I do beg you, Kung Fu, maybe write it down. We need to get this theory out there. It's something I'm willing to run with if you don't want to get on the podcast or do a video. But based on what he knows about the franchise, which is extensive, I mean, he's on our level, I would say. It sounded like a great theory and something that that we know these books are canon now, right? I mean, this Zahn novel is canon. His previous ones are not, correct? They're legends.
Yeah, those are all considered legends. Which I mean, those 3 books, the Thrawn trilogy from the Legend series, were really incredible. So I assume that this one Thrawn book for the new EU is going to be equally as good. So I'm probably going to pick it up soon and give it a read. If your boy says it's that great.
But yeah, he had compelling evidence for how Thrawn, through working with the Empire, may have already started to sniff out this potentially Snoke character, or this, because he specifically mentioned this is something we talked about when we talked about the Aftermath series in the conclusion, and how much we learned about Palpatine's post-Empire plans and what was going on in Jakku with all the Sith relics and this, that, and the other thing. But apparently at the end of Thrawn, spoilers everyone, he essentially knows that there is some sort of force from the unexplored galaxy that is playing a role in the galaxy that Star Wars is set in that we know about. Hopefully I'm summarizing that correctly, but that sounds like where it was going. And when I mentioned to Kung Fu about what Aftermath had to say about Jakku and what Palpatine was doing there and the Sith relics and how they sense this unknown galaxy pull of the dark side or the Force, it seems like they are kind of lining up. So who knows? It was good stuff. Like I said, if we get more information on it, well, I'll make sure to get it out there either in a post, a video, or we'll just talk about it more on this cast.
Yeah, man. I mean, I'm definitely excited for everything that's going to start coming in the new EU. I know that we have the books out already, the Aftermath series. They have some other I don't want to say like one-off books, but there are the books in the series that explain different portions of the the lost time between the movies and the cartoon series and stuff like that. So there's some pretty good EU stuff out there now. Obviously, you have the comics as well. So I plan on picking up the Thrawn book pretty soon. I have it on Kindle. I'll get it on my Kindle, so I don't have to wait for it to be delivered or anything like that. But yeah, man, lots of good Star Wars stuff coming down the pipe really soon.
All right, so as far as stuff to talk about, there wasn't a huge amount of information that has come out since Star Wars Celebration, which was our last cast. But last week we were getting little nuggets here and there on The Last Jedi, which we should start getting more and more and more as we approach December's launch. I know it sounds like it's far away, but if you're an older Star Wars fan like Nick and I, you know that time will pass quicker than you realize. And before you know it, Nick and I will be sitting here crying happily talking about the events of The Last Jedi come December 16th. So, a few things. Let's start with the news about something. Rian Johnson, he came out previously and said he changed Kylo Ren's scar, the location of it. He had his reasons. I think they're justified. Hopefully everyone moves on from that. I know I hate continuity issues too, but it's a scar. Who gives a shit? I'll get over it. So the latest thing he mentioned, a change he made to The Force Awakens, was at the very end, and it dealt with the droids that accompany Rey and Chewbacca to Acto, where Luke's at. And what he said is originally BB-8 was supposed to go, but he kind of said, can we switch him out for R2? And as Nick said when we were talking about what we're going to discuss today on Star Wars Time, he's like, yeah, well, that fucking makes complete sense. And I agree, but I guess we have to wonder, Nick, why in the first place do you think BB-8 was chosen? Is it because BB-8 has a much deeper connection to Rey in the new cast than R2?
See, that was my initial thought. Is like they're trying to increase the popularity of BB-8. Obviously, he's the
he needs it though. I mean,
yeah, I know.
He was a star the moment we saw him rolling through the Jakku marketplace.
Yeah, so everybody loves BB-8, but I think it was just another effort to really push the new characters, not really force them onto people, but just bring them more to prominence. But like I said before the cast started, it just makes more sense for R2 to be there. I mean, R2 is basically Luke's best friend in the world. He was the one that Luke entrusted with the galaxy map that showed where he was. And also, he has more of a... Like, even with Chewbacca, like, R2 is closer with Chewbacca than BB-8 or even Rey is at this point. Totally. And if you really think about it, BB-8's more Poe's droid. Like, he's Poe's little buddy than Rey's little buddy. Yep. So it kind of makes sense for BB-8 to be with Poe wherever he is, whether he's, flying around in his X-Wing fighter or, like, as we saw, Poe and BB-8 were together in the Episode 8 teaser trailer on that ship that was being attacked. So it kind of makes sense for Luke to be with R2 and then BB-8 to be with Poe, at least in my opinion.
I totally agree. I mean, I think we'll get plenty of BB-8. I hope we get plenty of BB-8 because he really is a standout new character. I mean, yes, he's a droid, but he's fantastic. I mean, just the concept of a practical ball with a magnetic head, he's beautiful. Plus his voice, Bill Hader, you gotta love the guy. But as far as, the threads that we're going to see on Acto with Luke and Rey, I mean, R2 has to be there. Like Nick said, that is his pet. I mean, you know how much we all love our pets. And you could probably even go as far as saying, R2 is his best friend. Because droids in the galaxy far, far away are more, or I guess they're somewhat treated like people than just droids. Although, in the original trilogy, Han definitely treated C-3PO like a droid, always threatening to have him turned off. And sometimes turning him off like a light switch. So, Han probably wasn't a huge fan of protocol droids, but most of the galaxy far, far away, they like them. They're equivalents. They're not just beasts of burden, if you will. So we've got to see Luke and R2 meet up again. I actually think we may even get a flashback when they see each other. It could be back to the burning image of the temple.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean... There's too much to cover with R2 and Luke. I mean, like we said, like you just said, the burning image of the temple with Luke and R2 sitting there. We need to cover that. And then if R2 wasn't with Luke, where would he be really? Like he wouldn't really have another place. Would he just be chilling out at the Resistance base and kind of helping with, planning attacks or helping Leia with whatever she's doing? It really doesn't feel like he has a space to be in if he's not with Luke in some sort of capacity.
Yeah, I didn't even think about it that way, but you're right, because technically C-3PO and R2 really shouldn't have the type of key roles that they did in, you could argue, the first 6 Skywalker movies, right? While the movies were never directly about those two, at least in the original trilogy, they essentially drove the narrative. Like, we saw the unfolding of the Skywalker saga in 4, 5, and 6 unfold through the eyes of the droid. And you can make that case. It's very similar in 1, 2, and 3. They show the origins of the droid. But still, those droids, if it's not for R2, fucking Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and Padme are dead, right? It's over. It's fucking Star Wars over, just like that. It starts and ends. So, I mean, if it's not for R2 and C-3PO, the Rebels never get the Death Star plans. I mean, they're very important players, even though they're robots in the first 6 Skywalker films. But I think in these 3, they're probably not going to have any of those moments. C-3PO won't. Not that he ever really did. I mean, he was always a hero by circumstance, and R2 usually made him a hero. But I could still see R2 pulling something out of his little rusty head and maybe saving the day here in 8 or 9. Who knows? What do you think?
Yeah, I think he definitely still has a heroic role.
Or do you think he's like somewhere geriatric? I mean, do you think he's like just old and nutty? I mean, as we found out, he wasn't powered down by a human. He chose to essentially hibernate because he was so sad being away from Luke. So is R2 still a little nutty? I mean, he's always had a little bit of a curious personality to him, If you at least listen to what C-3PO and how he translates him, I mean, R2 seems to be he's not as big of an asshole as Chopper is from Rebels, but R2, like Astromechs, definitely has an attitude.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely anthropomorphized for basically a droid that looks like a walking trash can, but I mean, to the level to where he can feel a level of depression to actually just shut himself down because Luke has exiled himself is something that we've really never kind of seen before in a droid, maybe aside from the more human side of Chopper from Rebels, but like even with C-3PO, we've never really seen emotional responses to real world events like that before. Obviously, like C-3PO and R2-D2 have both been like distressed and high tense moments in the series before, but this is way different. So it's going to be really cool to see how R2 responds to being reunited with Luke, and if that kind of reinvigorates him, and if he gets kind of pulled out of his depression and really has his same attitude back, his same level of, you know, craziness that he had in the prequel trilogy and in the original trilogy.
He was such an ass. I love the guy. I mean, he'd just go do whatever the fuck he wants. You know, he'd plug in and be like, all right. You know, we learned that when they were on the Death Star in A New Hope, he was like, hey, I'll download the entire Empire archives while I'm here fucking around with the doors looking for the princess.
Yeah, and you could really see, like, especially in the prequel trilogy, that George Lucas really wanted to give R2-D2 a more, I guess, like a more humanized role than he had in the original trilogy. Because, I mean, we sometimes will roll our eyes at shit like this, but, like, in Episode 3, they had the scene where, like, he single-handedly takes out 2 destroyers or 2 super battle droids with, like, the oil slick and, like, sets them on fire and flies away and shit like that. Like, he does a bunch of cool, crazy stuff like that in the prequel trilogy. So I want to see if he's going to be given a role like that, or if he has any kind of play like that in the new trilogy.
You know,
like in episode
talking about this, I think we have an agenda for an upcoming cast. Best R2 moments.
Oh man, yeah, that would be
the
great.
Countdown. I'm gonna put that in the show notes right here. Definitely something to talk about, because there are a lot of moments that he has across the 7 movies he's been in. So definitely, we'll just make sure to stay tuned, right, people? Just stay subscribed right here to the best podcast for Star Wars fans and pop culture geeks, and you won't miss it. So that was one of the news items. Next one, again, is a fairly, I think for most people with a brain, an obvious conclusion, but it's always nice to hear it right from the man himself. And Rian Johnson was prodded again about what's Luke's role, how's Luke going to be looked at or portrayed in The Last Jedi. And Rian pretty much said straight up, we are going to find out why he exiled himself. Because if you think about it, it's a pretty major self-exile that Luke imposed on himself when you consider that his own flesh and blood led to the downfall of his resurrection of the Jedi Order. I mean, that's got to be pretty rough. And then this flesh and blood goes off and essentially emboldens and strengthens the First Order and allows, maybe not the dark side as we know it to come back, but it definitely allows the shadier side of the Force to once again dominate in the galaxy. So you have to wonder, if you're this Jedi Master and you're for all things righteous and you want to combat evil, what the fuck happened to you so bad that you're like, you know what, fuck it, I'm not even going to combat this stuff head on. I fucked up so bad, I'm out. I need to figure shit out big time. Like, he pretty much checked himself into Jedi therapy, right? I mean, he's like,
yeah,
I fucked up so bad. Shit is so screwed up because of me. I need to reboot all of my thinking and just drop out of the galaxy. Hopefully other people can step in and keep the First Order under control for a bit.
I almost feel arrogant in feeling like the answer to this query is like obvious, because to me it just seems really obvious. And it's not even playing completely into the fact that like Luke just feels shitty that this all came about, quote unquote, because of him. It almost seems like Luke was able to kind of look at the past and then compare it to what just happened and realize, like, hey, this isn't the first time this happened. Like, we had the fall of the Jedi Order previously. Like, obviously, the span of time that the Jedi were policing the galaxy was way longer before the fall than it was this time around. But I think what happened is Luke looked and he's like, these two falls are very similar. You had a student within the Jedi ranks who, through some, turn of events, found that the teachings of the Jedi Order were either too stringent or something. There was something about it that led him to completely stray, and not only stray, but completely destroy the Order as it was known. So there has to be something deeper that we're not getting here that's caused a similar fall twice. So to me, it's pretty obvious. Like, he goes to Acto, where we already know is the site of the first Jedi Temple. He's in search of knowledge not just for himself, but also for the betterment of the galaxy. It's like, look, we need to find out why these falls are happening, and it has to do with how the Jedi Order is run as a whole, not just the way that I ran it, or not just the way that Master Yoda and Mace Windu ran it in the past, but just the overall tenets of the Jedi Order. There must be something different, or something that was lost in translation in the later stages of the Order. And I think that's what Luke is trying to figure out ultimately, is like, how can we establish a force for good in the galaxy without having the risk of it falling apart every time something like this happens?
It's a very interesting way to phrase it, and I think you're right. Because if you look at it, and you want to make comparisons to the second fall, the one that Luke helped with, technically Obi-Wan and Yoda played the long game too, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, they knew, shit was fucked up, right? I mean, all their friends were just murdered. The Jedi were made to look like fools, not trusted. Again, they were getting whacked left and right. So, yeah, I think maybe you're right. I mean, usually patience is a virtue, and good things come to those who wait. So, yeah, I'm with you 100%. There's nothing I can even argue there. I think you're right. I think it's more of what we've been trying to do just doesn't work. I need to go get it from the source.
Yeah, because essentially Luke was just trying to rebuild the Jedi almost exactly as they were. Maybe a few changes here and there, but he essentially only knew the Jedi as it was taught by Yoda and Obi-Wan to him. So he didn't really have his own ideas. He didn't have a fresh view on what this new order should be. He just kind of was building it based off of the tenets that he was taught when he was on Dagobah, and then, obviously through communing with Force Ghost with Yoda and Obi-Wan over the period of time that we didn't see between episodes 6 and 7. So he really, he may have had, I'll change this a little bit, or I'll tweak this here, and maybe he had a couple of new ideas on there, but, it was essentially the same type of order he was trying to rebuild, and clearly it went to shit, and it went to shit way faster than what it did previously. So now it's time for a whole new perspective, and I think that comes into the line that everybody freaked out when they heard in the episode 8 trailer, is it's time for the Jedi to end. So that's what he's working towards, is the end of the traditional Jedi, and this is we talked about this during the teaser cast, the end of the traditional Jedi and the rise of this new kind of force, whether you call it's probably not going to be called Jedi, the rise of this new, good side of the galaxy or something.
Some deep fucking thoughts today, dude. I like it. I like where we're going here. No, I agree. I think, first it was kind of it's just, hey, let's get an article out on Star Wars type of topics, but I'm very interested. I hope Luke, I know he's not technically going to be the main focus, even though Rian keeps telling us he is. Maybe he will be. We'll be surprised. But I want to get inside that head. I definitely need some explanations, and this is going to be one of them, and hopefully we'll get that, because I don't know. There's people out there that like endings that are somewhat open, and you can sit there and kind of make up your own. I appreciate those to a point, but I'm also someone, when it comes to my lore, I want to know shit black and white. You know what I mean? I want to know if it starts today, I want to know how we got to B.
Yeah, exactly. It makes it is kind of frustrating when they leave those open endings because, I mean, it's fun for, people like us who will spend endless hours speculating on what the ending really means, what it could mean, what it could lead to. Can this be this, or are these characters linked, and all this different kind of stuff that can come from open endings. But it's also nice to be able to look at it and be like, man, that was such a profound way to close out, whoever's story. This is a great way to close out Han Solo's story or Luke Skywalker's story or anybody. So I can definitely see the benefits of having both like a very black and white ending and an open one. But I think for Star Wars purposes, it almost always seems like there's going to be an openness to a point. Like obviously with the end of episode 6, it was very clear cut. It was black and white. Like evil is destroyed, the Empire is dead. And for the movie universes, everything was hunky-dory, happy times. But then, like, for those of us who were interested in the EU, that power vacuum that was left open after the destruction of the second Death Star and the death of the Emperor and Darth Vader, like, there's a lot of stories still to be told. So that's what's great about the Star Wars universe is you can have both. You can have these black and white things, but then you can also have those black and white endings lead into very open discussion about like, well, what's going to happen next? There's this huge, what if, what now?
December 15th, where are you?
I know, right? So far away, but we lasted 10 years from the end of, episode 3 to the inception of episode 7.
You go back to that time, I mean, we thought it was done. I mean, that was it.
Yeah, it was.
Right?
It was like the Dark Ages.
Oh, dude, there was a time in 2005 after Sith came out where I probably tuned out of all things Star Wars for a few years. I mean, I didn't sit there with like an X up making me a cross, like get away. I mean, I still would buy shit here and there and read a story if something mentioned Star Wars. But it wasn't all-consuming like it is now. I mean, my life is dictated a lot by Star Wars. I mean, a lot of stuff I do for hobby is dedicated to Star Wars. But there was a very dark time after 2005 where I was like, this is it. This is how it ended. The franchise that molded me into who I am here at 25 years old, this is how it ended. And did I just waste my life? Like throwing every bit of my soul into this franchise.
It was a very odd time because the stories that were being told, the stories that were being told on television with the Clone Wars series, they weren't progressing the story. They were just kind of filling in small gaps. And then if you weren't one to actively go out and seek EU stuff, like the books and everything, then it did kind of just have this weird ending. And there were some amazing stories in the EU, but you can't really use those as driving factors like you can major motion pictures. It's two completely different things. So there was like this really odd period of time where like after episode 5 ended, like that's or not episode 5, but after episode 3 ended in 2005, that's kind of when I really dug into the EU and I really started reading, especially the later sections of it, like the Legacy of the Force series, the New Jedi Order series, the Darkness trilogy, and stuff like that. So I really my main focus was not really I read a lot of books directly after episode 6. Like, well, what happens right after? So I read the X-Wing series, I read the Truce at Bakura, which was the book that was right after 6. But I wanted to know, where is this whole Jedi thing going? What is Luke building in, and then, what direction was it heading in? So that was, really cool to be able to fill that in. But now we don't have to worry about that because Disney has basically said, we're making Star Wars until people don't want to see Star Wars anymore. So
yeah, I think it's funny when they try to put dates to it. Oh, yeah, we're thinking 2021, we may be done. Bullshit.
It's no, you're not.
What the fuck are you talking about? I mean, it's a fucking license to print money.
Exactly. When the quote-unquote last movie drops in 2021 and it makes $1 billion, you just can be like, well, that's it. No more.
I mean, no, you gotta start thinking about it now. What are the chances of the new age trilogy becoming 6 films?
I think it's big.
Do they stop at 9? I mean, is
No.
it just 9, it's done, it's like Return of the Jedi, go invent your own stories now, or just wait for comic books and shit to sprinkle little bits of narrative as you were just explaining?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we know that this new trilogy is basically an extension of the Skywalker saga. Like, we all assumed that the Skywalker saga ended at episode 6, but it didn't. So we still have Luke still around, we still have Leia still around, and we still have what we're going to assume is Rey as another Skywalker is still around.
Well, let's say she's not, and by 9 they're all gone. I mean, that's pretty much it, right? I mean,
that will be the conclusion of the Skywalker saga, but then I think you're going to have what is going to be the start of a new saga, but also the continuation of the new trilogy. So you'll have Rey's story continuing, probably, because it would be really weird for her to just have these 3 movies, especially considering that her role in episode 7 was big, but it was an unknown quantity. So, like, she was there and you knew she was important, but you didn't really know why. And then now with episode 8, we kind of get, like, the revelation of who she was, and then with episode 9, we'll get some sort of conclusion onto her current storyline, but I think it would almost be bad to end her story there. Like, I feel like you need to continue that in some way.
Yeah, it's interesting shit to think about. I'm just wondering if there's one day, you know, if we're still alive and well and the world hasn't blown up yet, if we'll be talking about Star Wars 15.
Yeah, dude, I hope so. I mean, obviously both of us are like,
yeah, I'm not one to complain.
I'm
I'm sure there's people out there rolling their eyes like, yeah, that's enough with the fucking Star Wars, but you keep producing the quality of films and stories they're putting out now, I'll watch this shit until the cows come home. I mean,
exactly. And I think the best way that it's been done so far is this family lineage kind of thing. Like, obviously, every major motion picture of Star Wars, aside from Rogue One, has been focused on the Skywalker family. So I think keeping that going to
you got to keep the standalone formula, but you also have to keep rolling out this Skywalker opera.
Yeah, Skywalker or whatever it may be.
Yeah, and then what it turns into when the torch is officially passed at the end of 9, because it really hasn't been passed fully yet.
No,
Han passed a bit of it in Force Awakens. We'll probably get another pass in Jedi, and then the final pass in the last movie.
Yeah, so there's still a lot of stuff. We went on a huge tangent here, just talking about like why Luke is going to be on the island.
And you know what? Because Nick and I, before we turned on the mics, we're like, "Oh man, it's going to be like 5 minutes. Fuck it, ain't much to talk about. Fuck it." I'm like, I'm sure we'll figure out how to turn it into 45 minutes, and we're getting there. We're over 30 now, so let's go ahead and move on to the last little topic we've had since the last cast, and Nick dug this one up. But we got to look at some toys coming out for Last Jedi, and Making Star Wars has identified one of the toys. And, you know, Making Star Wars, they get a lot of stuff right. They get some stuff wrong. They make really weird drawings of shit, but they tend to know their shit. So we're going to give them some credit, even though I hate them. Just kidding. Anyway, so they found these toy picks. And again, it's like whatever. They look like little Micro Machine versions of ships you can see. One is a TIE fighter. It looks just like the First Order TIEs. One is like, it looks like an old school Star Destroyer, right? I mean, it looks just like fucking...
Yeah, I mean, I don't see any differences. The bridge is still the same, especially with the communication orbs on the side.
Does not look much different than what you would have seen in Return of the Jedi, you know, with the fleet over the Battle of Endor. I mean, but the interesting one here is, and it's what Making Star Wars is claiming as Kylo's personal ship. And what's interesting, it goes back to, if it is his ship, it definitely highlights his penchant for all things granddaddy.
Yeah.
Because it look like, imagine and I'm going to start putting the Star Wars cast on YouTube again, so if I remember and get the time mark right, I'll go ahead and throw an image of this up, what we're about to talk about. But it looks like it's an homage to Vader's TIE styles, but also Ren's shuttle from The Force Awakens, because it's got like a flat body from what we can see, like the where Kylo would sit and pilot. It looks fairly flat, at least at this angle, where the wings are that more narrow TIE style, but the same look as the First Order TIEs.
Yeah, I mean, it's got the paneled off wings, which is very reminiscent of current TIE fighters for the First Order and old ones, but it also has a very TIE Interceptor look to it. Like, if you remember the ship that Vader piloted in Episode 4 when he was chasing Luke through the trench, it had the TIE-style wings, but they were kind of curved in on it, which gave it almost like a circular look. When you see the picture of this new ship that's claimed to be Kylo's personal one, it has that same sort of enclosed circle to it, but it also has like an elongated feel that is more reminiscent of TIE Interceptors. So he definitely took inspiration from both types of ships. Like, he took inspiration from his grandfather's ship, and he also took inspiration from the Interceptor, because I feel like the Interceptors are like the dog fighters. Those are the ones that want to be in there, and that kind of fits Kylo's style. Like, Vader was more about like the isolated kill. Like, he had his 2 boys with him on his wing, and like they isolated a target and they picked it off. But it, like, to me, it seems like Kylo's the type of guy who wants to be in the dogfight, and this ship really gives him the opportunity to do that. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you read like the little descriptor under it, but it sounds like this ship is going to be in Snoke's mega flagship, and Ren is all feeling down on himself for fucking up in The Force Awakens. So like, this is what he goes out to hunt down members of the Resistance.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense because Snoke is essentially Kylo's only mentor at this point. I mean, if he lets Snoke down, then he's pretty much just made the biggest mistake that he could. But yeah, I could definitely see Kylo going out on, like, basically get back into good grace missions in the ship and trying to, whether
he's
it's
such a little pussy. I mean, he really is. He's just like, he's just like Anakin. He is just like his grandfather. A little puss, like, oh, like me, Snoke, just like Anakin.
Basically.
Like, oh, like me, Palpatine, like me.
Yeah, and if you think about it, I mean, we don't know a lot of, and this is something that I actually hope to learn about. We don't know a lot about the relationship with his father that he had. We know that Anakin didn't have a father, which is a completely different thing altogether. But we know that Kylo's relationship with Han was strained, at the very least, just because of the one line he said to Rey when he was interrogating her. So he does have this, probably he has this need to have attention from a male father figure that he's never had before. So Snoke is that figure to him now. So when he fucks up like he did in Episode 7 and literally gets an entire space station destroyed, like, he's got to do whatever he can to win back the affection of his father figure. So it makes more sense for Kylo than it did for Anakin, because Anakin never had a father figure. Like, he just didn't have one. He had his mother, and that was it. So he never had that neglect from a male figure that would lead him to do stuff like Kylo's doing to impress Snoke. So I can see it from Kylo's end, because he was in that situation, but from Anakin it was very odd to see how he was so.
Well, he was swayed by just sheer power. I mean, yeah. he was intoxicated by the power Palpatine wielded over the Senate as the Supreme Chancellor. And Palpatine knew what he was doing. He always told Anakin what he wanted to hear. I mean, Anakin was someone that wanted to be told how great he was all the time. And being in the Jedi Order, that wasn't something he was going to get from his colleagues or, his closest friends, Obi-Wan. I mean, a Jedi's never going to sit there and tell you how great you are.
Yeah, and
you're supposed to just know that.
What's going to be really cool is to see there's so many interesting relationship dynamics with just Kylo himself, because we already kind of know a little bit about him and Han. We're going to learn about him and Snoke. Clearly, this little blurb here suggests that he has like a father figure type of mentality towards Snoke. And then also the relationship between Luke and Kylo, because that's the one that really led to Kylo's turn, probably. Is it like, did Luke try too hard to fill the role of father when he was at the Jedi Academy? Or did he remove himself from that role too much and he just allowed Kylo to kind of death spiral without a real father figure in his life? And then obviously you have the relationship between Kylo and Leia that we've never really seen before. Obviously we know that Leia, by telling Han, like, please bring our son back, like, she still has an immense amount of love for him. But we don't know, we've never really heard so far how Kylo feels about Leia.
I mean, I look at Kylo as he's just someone who, to me, didn't get his way, so he was at that age, an adolescent, fuck you type of guy.
It could definitely, because he's still.
I have a hard time believing Han and Leia were just these complete asshole parents that could drive a kid to become a murderous nut job.
See, I have that feeling about Leia. I really think that Leia would have been a great mother. I think that Han could have been a terrible father.
Just absent father, I would assume. Not like a drunk asshole that beats him and beat his mom, but just a guy that was never around.
Well, no, yeah, definitely more of an absentee father than an abusive father, but also like he's the type of father that didn't want to be a father. It almost seems like he was surprised by this kid, and then he felt like that. Like Kylo being there is what caused him to kind of stay with Leia, get married and stuff like that, try to domesticate himself.
Well, then we got an excerpt from the book that kind of sums up Han's state of mind through all this when Leia was pregnant. It was like, he was there, he's ready to be dad, but I think it was Leia that she might not have said it out loud, but thinking to herself like, I know this life
your life
can't last for Han. Like Han needs to be out doing exciting shit, and that doesn't even mean like helping the rebels or the resistance or whatever happened after the fall of the Empire. He just needed to be out doing crazy shit, smuggling. I mean, that's who he is.
That's his life. So, yeah, I'm just really interested in the family dynamic of Kylo. Like aside from just him and Han, like him with Luke, him with Leia, him with the other children at the Jedi Academy, like there's a lot that goes into, I mean, yeah, like you can look at him and say like he's just an emo crybaby kid who doesn't get what he wants and that's what led him to get there, but I think there's a lot more to it that we haven't seen yet, and maybe it'll be covered in the movies, and if it isn't, hopefully it's covered in books in some way, like we get to see what exactly brought him to his downfall, because we got to see it with Anakin, but it was such a disappointing fall that it didn't live up to whatever anybody could have thought about it. So I'm hoping that we get a little bit more explanation behind Kylo's fall, other than just like he wanted to seek power because the Force wasn't strong enough, what Luke was teaching him or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, we could dedicate a whole other cast to this topic, but it's all interesting stuff. Hopefully we'll get some little nuggets here and there in The Last Jedi and then Episode 9, and we'll be happy, but I don't think we'll ever be happy. We'll always want to know more and why and how we somehow turn this stuff into real life, and that's fine. That's the joys of being a fan of something fantastical or sci-fi related. All right, buddy, I think we hit everything we wanted to hit, so thanks again for tuning in. You now know what to do. You need to start following the best podcast for Star Wars fans and pop culture geeks on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, you name it. We just got on Stitcher officially a week ago. I will be doing most of the Star Wars casts as YouTube videos again, so you can listen right through the website. You can listen through YouTube. You can grab it on your favorite player, such as iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play. We are here for you. Please interact with us. Let us know what you want us to talk about, or we'll just keep pulling shit out of our ass, because that usually ends or leads to a decent discussion like today. We basically had nothing, and we turned it into almost 45 minutes of pure Star Wars fandom.
Yep.
So
that's what we do, man.
Keep on doing what you do, people. We love you for it. Thanks for listening. Matt Haywood here signing off for Star Wars Time with Nick Caminita on the best podcast for Star Wars fans and pop culture geeks podcast network, hosted by entertainmentbuddha.com, and whatever other little things I want to add here at the end. All right? You know how we do the end here. May the Force be with you always.